Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. My name is Erica and you are at the Lopsided Crafter. Grab yourself something to drink, sit back for a spell, and let's talk about all of our yarny goodness and creations. Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. My name is Erica and I am the Lopsided Crafter. So today we are going to start our newest tutorial on the new sock looms by Cindy Wood Crafts. These came out on the market on October 1st. If you're watching this video before October 1st, then they will be available to you October 1st, 2023. I will have a link below that will take you to the website Cindy Wood Crafts. These are a 1/4 inch. This one is 1/4 inch gauge. This one is the 64 peg. And then I also have the 56 peg. If you're unfamiliar with sock knitting on the loom, the reason why these pegs are a different color is because they're marked out for our wraps and turns that we do for our actual toe and heel shaping. Okay, so I've already done my swatch. I've done my measurements on it. And now we're going to go to the spreadsheet. And if you do not currently have the spreadsheet, that there's a link for that also below that will take you to my Etsy shop, where all you got to do is key in your numbers and it will tell you exactly how many rounds, rows, everything that you need to make a sock that will fit you or your intended recipient. So let's head over to the spreadsheet. I'm going to guess, just because a 1/4 inch gauge is very close to a US 2.25 millimeter knitting needle, that I will probably be using the 64 peg, because I typically cast on 64 stitches for my sock. So let's head over to the spreadsheet and see if we can get her going. Okay, so here we are. Technology. Okay, so like I said, I've already got I've already done my gauge swatch. I've taken my measurements, and for my 2-inch by 2-inch swatch, my stitches are 16, which means I got 16 stitches in those 2 inches. And my rows are 28 rows in 2 inches. So when I put that 16 and that 28 in, it gives me my stitches per inch and my rows per inch. So my stitches per inch are 8 and my rows per inch are 14. Now, I know just from making a lot of socks for myself that the ball of my foot measurement is 8.25. So I'm going to put that in there. And then my foot length is 9 inches. So what that tells me is all the information that I'm going to need to know to make my sock. Now, right here, it says 66 pegs. So I was really close. I said that I thought I was going to have to use the 64 peg loom, which is what I am going to use. Now, it does say 66. 64 is not that far off. It's 2 pegs. You want negative ease, so I'm okay with using the 64. That the 64 peg loom is going to be perfect. Now let's just see, because these are new to the market, let's just see how the how the division worked out for the heel and toe shaping. So if I come down here to where it says 1/3 of the toe heel stitches, that says 11. So let's just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's already marked off for you and everything is perfect. So now, continuing on, I know that I'm going to have 22 rows for half of the toe and the heel area. Okay, so if I take my 126 total rows or rounds and I subtract the 82, I have 44 left, which is divided by 2 is your 22 for your toe, work the foot, and then 22 for the heel. So that is how I determine how long I need to make my sock. Alternatively, if you do not have the spreadsheet, or if it's something that does not interest you, you can follow the tutorial to your toe, like I'm going to show you. There are standard measurements all over the internet that will tell you foot is this long based on this shoe size. There's information all over the internet that you can find that. And then you just take a sock ruler or any type of rigid ruler and stick it inside the toe and measure until you get the particular length that you need. Let's get started on our tutorial. You're going to need your loom. If you're following the spreadsheet, you're going to need the loom with the amount of pegs that the spreadsheet said to use. If not, I will tell you a little bit about my foot so you can kind of guesstimate which loom would be better for you. I wear a size 7.5 shoe. I have a wide foot. I typically cast on 64 stitches if I'm using needles. So I will be using the 64 peg 1/4 inch loom by Cindy Wood Crafts. These are the newer looms, like I've said before, with the heel and toe shaping stitches pegs already marked off for you. You will need your looming tool. I use these by Artisanal Turning. I love the way they feel in my hands. They are acrylic, so it is hard, but they're ergonomic, which I like. You're going to need your yarn. This is yarn, fingering weight yarn by Arkansas Yarn Company. And then you're going to need a contrasting color if you're going to do different color heel. This is yarn by myself, the Lopsided Crafter. Okay, so this is the peg that we're going to be starting with. This is the peg that we're going to start our cast on with. If you are right-handed, you will want to work with the marked pegs on the left side. And the reason is because most right-handed people find it easier to purl on going clockwise, where left-handed people find it more easy to purl going counterclockwise. So if you are right-handed, your loom is going to look like this when you start your cast on, If you are left-handed, it is going to look like this. Although this stitch marker marking your peg 1 will actually be down here on this side. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is put our yarn around this little stopper here. If you don't have a stopper on your loom, you can just alternatively give yourself enough slack and hold the working yarn. And the working yarn is going to come in between the first 2 marked pegs. What we're going to do, I'm going to try to do this in a way that you can see it without my hands getting in the way. So you have your working yarn. You're going to come in between this peg and this peg. Now, if you're left-handed, you're actually going to be starting on the opposite side, and your marked pegs will be over here. So you're going to come in between those first 2 pegs. You're going to wrap it around the front. You're going to go over here to the next side and wrap it there. And you're going to continue to do that all the way around the loom. Now this, let me stop here just a second and show you. This is why you want to have extra tail, because after we get casted on and we get at least half of our stitches knitted off, we're going to come back around here and we're going to take this tail off of this holder right here, and we're going to kind of fish it underneath all of this. Then that tail then will actually be wrapped around that peg. I hope that made sense. Of course, I'll show you when we get to that point. Okay, so continue wrapping each peg. Make sure that you get every single one of them. And you don't want to do it tight, but you want to do it taut. That's simply because you want to keep your tension the same. Now you've got to pay extra attention. See how it just wrapped around 2 pegs? Sometimes with the smaller gauge looms, it is real easy to do that. So just take your time. Once you've done it several times, it'll be real easy to cast on. Now, the Kitchener cast on does use more yarn than doing a cuff down type sock, but I just I hold on to those scraps and then put them into blankets, or if I'm doing a scrappy sock, something like that, then I've still got a little bit of extra yarn that I can just pop into another project. You know, like I said, either a scrappy blanket or scrappy socks. Maybe I need a pop of color for a shawl or a cowl or something like that. I always hold on to my scraps for things like that. So you kind of want to just, you know, push them down a little bit as you're going so that it doesn't pop off, because if one pops off, the whole thing will unravel on you. So continue doing that back and forth, and then we will meet back up. I did just want to say that you might find it easier if you turn the loom sideways while you're casting on. Sometimes it's depending on the shape of the loom, it might be a little easier to actually see those pegs. So we are almost casted on. See how that one, oh, you might not have seen that. That one actually popped and the whole thing wanted to start unraveling. Have done that many a times. Okay, so I want to show you right here. Oops, sorry for hitting the camera. This one right here was actually skipped. So you just simply take it back off the one next to it and put it back on. Now, when you get down here to this other side, things are going to be a little tighter. But as long as you wrap every peg in the same direction that you've been doing, you should be fine. Sometimes it's a little harder to see the pegs when you're using a yarn that is the same color. Okay, so I'm almost down here at the end. As you can see, I've got these couple pegs right here left that aren't wrapped. So what we're going to do, and I'm just going to move this camera a little bit so you can see. So we're coming around and we're still making sure that we're going around every peg. And now we're going to wrap our very last peg. And if we did it right, we should be going in the direction that works for us. So if you are right-handed, it should be going this way. And if you're left-handed, your yarn should be wrapped where it's going this way. So now I'm just going to push these down. Because we don't want them to pop off while we're casting on. So you see this is taut. It's not tight, you know, where the pegs aren't like bending in towards each other, but it is taut enough to where it's going to stay on there. And you definitely want that for this cast on. So now I'm going to show you the next step, because we haven't officially finished our cast on. We're still working on it. Okay, so we're gonna wrap around this peg right here. and essentially the very first peg is skipped because we only have that yarn around that one peg. Let me adjust the camera again so that you can see what we're doing here. Okay. So we have our working yarn coming around our peg, and we're going to put it on top, and we're going to knit off. Now, you need to be extremely slow and careful when you do this part, because if one of these stitches pops off, the whole thing will unravel, and then you will have to restart. So just take your time, knit those stitches off. I'm assuming because you're sock knitting that you already know how to knit and purl. I have other videos on my channel that show you how to knit and purl. So you can look those up if you need to. You're just going to go really, really slow, because what you're doing right now is you're essentially locking all these in. Okay, so continue to do that. And when you get around over here to the other side, where our tail is, I will show you what to do. Okay, once I get to the other side, I will take that working or that tail and take it off the stopper peg. And I am kind of putting it right down here between these two pegs. And I'm just going to push it through the bottom. So I say you want to give yourself a long enough tail, because it can be tricky to pull this down if you have to use a crochet hook or something. So now that I've got that wrapped around, I am just going to put it back on this stopper peg for a few rounds, just to kind of hold it in place. And I'm just going to continue knitting around. And now that one might be a little tight just because it's around your stopper peg. But we're going to continue knitting these stitches off. Back to the beginning. Peg over here. And then I'm going to show you what I do next, so that it's easier for me to close this off later in the sock. And you'll understand what I mean when we get to that point. So the Kitchener cast on, all this yarn right here just kind of like loosely just goes along with the actual project with your sock, and it kind of just hangs out into in the back of the sock, and you've got to make all of this disappear essentially. But that's real easy to do, especially with this little hack that I use, so that I know exactly which yarn to pull on. So we're almost here at the end, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this or not. I know I mentioned it during the cast on, but we don't want to pull tight. We just want to lay that yarn across the top of our peg, because if we pull too tight, then our tension's going to change, and then our gauge will change, and you risk the risk that your sock won't fit. Okay, so we're back over here. This is our initial peg, and now we have officially casted on. And we're just going to push these down a little bit. So this is what you should have. You've got a stitch on each peg on both sides, and then on the inside it kind of looks like this. It almost looks like you've got two strands coming from each peg. This is the way it's supposed to look, so you're okay if it does look like this. So now what we're going to do is we are going to start doing our shaping. And we know from the spreadsheet that 22 rounds is going to be our toe. And another way that we know that is because we have 11 pegs marked off here on this loom. Again, if you're not using this loom, I do have another tutorial. It will be linked below, and it's also in the iCards. But we know that we're going to have 22 because we have 11 pegs. So how do I know that that's going to be 22 because we have 11 pegs? Well, because we're going to be decreasing down 11 times and then increasing back 11 times, which is our 22. Okay, so here comes the first part of our heel. We're going to be doing our decrease section, and we're going to be doing wraps and turns. So we have our working yarn coming from this side. So we are going to knit all the way over here to the peg before our last one, and we're going to wrap and turn this one, and then we're going to knit back, and we're going to wrap and turn the next. It'll be this peg because our first wrap and turn was on this end. We're going to wrap and turn that one, and then we're going to go back, and we're going to stop one peg before the peg that has 2 loops. So this one will be wrapped and turned. And then we'll go back to the other side, and this one will be wrapped and turned. So we're going to wrap and turn every peg going back and forth until we have 2 loops on all of our marked pegs. And these pegs will have 1 loop. So let me show you how to do that. It is really simple. I know socks can be somewhat intimidating, but as long as you take your time and go slow, you should be fine. Now that first one may be a little tight. Again, like I said, you just kind of want to set the yarn on top. Don't pull it tight. Let the loom do what it's supposed to do. I typically hold the working yarn in my hand. I'm a crocheter and knitter as well, so I have, well, continental knitter, I shall say. And so I've always held the yarn in my left hand. So doing this motion for me is really no different than those. I find I have more control over the yarn doing it that way. But of course, do whatever is more comfortable for you. Because at the end of the day, this is your project. I'm just showing you how I do it. going to continue all the way over here to the other side. But before we work back, I'm going to show you how I know exactly what stitches are what when it comes to closing this Kitchener cast on later. So before I do my final stitch, which is a wrap and turn, I'm going to take a length of contrast yarn and I'm just going to set it here. I want it to be around those marked pegs, just kind of there in the middle, hanging out. So what you want to do, again, leave yourself enough length so that you can fish that through. So I have that one side in, coming out the bottom here. I'm just going to pull a little bit of a length there so it doesn't come out as I'm doing the same thing here on the other side. Through, pull it down from the other side, and then what I like to do is just flip the loom over, and I just kind of tie this into a bow here, out of the way. I always tie it into a bow so that I can reuse the yarn for the next sock. Okay, so now we're back over here to our other side. I'm going to pull out a little bit of length of yarn, and we're going to do our first wrap and turn. So you may be able to see that yarn right there kind of popped up above our stitch. You want to make sure that it is actually below the stitch because we're not working that yarn. It's just kind of more or less like a placemaker. We're here to our last marked peg. I'm just going to pick that stitch off very carefully. I'm going to leave it on the hook, and I'm going to take that working yarn and I'm going to wrap it around that peg and put it back on. So now what's happened is, now disregard this because this is our place marker yarn. Now you can see that the yarn, if I pull it, it's coming from this peg. You see that yarn moving? So by putting that yarn behind this peg, it allows us to turn without actually working that yarn. So that is why it's called a wrap, because we wrapped it around that peg and now we're turning. So now what we're going to do is knit back to the other side the same way that we've been doing. Again, find the rhythm that works best for you, whether it's holding the yarn or picking it up before each stitch, with whatever works for you. You do not have to knit pulling the stitch over like I do. If you prefer, you can grab it from the top and pull it over. I just find for myself personally, with this thinner yarn, I have more control if I lift it over, because I kind of holding my finger back here behind this peg and holding that yarn, which kind of helps it not pop off the actual stitch. Because this yarn is so small, sometimes if you pop that stitch off, sometimes it is hard to find it and put it back on the loom. And the last thing I want you to have to do is restart because of a dropped stitch. Trust me, I've done it. I've done it many times, especially in the beginning when I was learning, and you just kind of feel defeated. I know it's all part of the learning process, but if I can help you not have to go through that part of the learning process, then I'm all for it. And we're just going to continue knitting back to our other side and do our first wrap and turn on this side of the loom. And then I am going to turn you loose and let you get all the wraps and turns for the decrease section done. And then we will pick back up and do the increase section. I'm sorry for keep getting out of the video. It's sometimes it can be hard to see what you're doing through the actual screen. Okay, so we're back over here. We've got our last peg and it needs to be wrapped and turned. So again, we're just going to pick that stitch up, pop it off, bring that working yarn around that peg, put our loop back on, and now we have one stitch that is wrapped on this side and one that is wrapped on this side. And how you know that it's wrapped is because it has two stitches. Okay, so now you're going to continue and you're going to work over here. You're going to wrap this one, work back, wrap your next peg over here, and you're going to do that, like I said, back and forth until all of your marked stitches have two loops on them. Okay, so at this point we should have all of our increases done. We have two loops on all of our marked pegs on this side and two loops on all of the pegs on this side. This is what it looks like on the inside. So you have this little bit that is worked and this back here that is just kind of flopping in the wind. And that is what you're supposed to have at this point. So now we are going to start our increases. And we're going to be doing essentially the same thing that we did for the decreases. We're going to start here and we're going to work back to this peg and work these two loops off. And then we'll come back and work these two loops off, work those two off, and we'll continue doing that back and forth until we have this peg left and this peg left, and then I will show you what to do from there. So now let me turn my camera a little bit. So we've done our final wrap and turn. So now what we're going to do is simply knit back to the first peg that we have 2 loops on. And at this point, we're still holding the yarn taut, but not tight. So that our tension is the same. And I'm sorry if the camera is shaking. The tripod is connected to my table, and sometimes the movement will make it shake. Okay, so we're almost here. All right. So now we've come to the first peg that has 2 loops on it. Okay. So what we're going to do is simply bring our yarn to the front and wrap the yarn around the back of that peg and then knit those 2 stitches off. Now, if you need to do them one at a time, you can, or you can take them both off at the same time, whichever is easier for you. And now we are simply going to knit back to the other side. And do the same thing. Trying to go a little slow here so I don't shake the camera too terribly much. Which, like I said, sometimes can be somewhat hard to do. Actually recording this from my phone instead of my actual camera. So it's not quite as stable as I would like it to be. Okay, so here we are back to the other side where we've got 2 loops. We're going to bring that yarn around to the front. And knit that stitch off. And now we're going to knit back to the other side. So what we're doing now is increasing our little toe area. We've already, like I said, done our decreases, and now we're doing the increases, which will create the toe part of the sock that our little piggies will stay in. Now, alternately, you can, if you have a wider toe bed, you can do wider than the 11 stitches or shorter than the 11 stitches. I just find that dividing the loom in thirds works the best, because then everything is symmetrical. All right. So now we got 2 loops. We're going to bring that yarn around. Yeah. We're going to bring that yarn around. Knit those 2 off. And then continue knitting back to the other side, to the next peg that has our 2 loops on it. once you develop your rhythm, you can knit a pair of socks in no time. Okay, so here's our next one that's got the 2 loops on it. Bring that yarn around. Knit the stitch off, and then continue knitting back this way to the next peg that's got the 2 loops. Continue doing that until you've got 1 left on this side and 1 left on this side. Okay, so I have just worked my last stitch on this side. So I have 1 here and 1 over here. Okay. So if you've ever knit socks before, whether it's on the loom or on the needles, where the joining is when we go back into the round, there's always a little gap. And a way to alleviate that gap is that we're not going to work back this way and then work back this way. We are going to now start working in the round. So from here, we are just going to knit back to this side like we've been doing. We're going to treat this as 1 stitch and knit that off, and then we're going to start knitting on this side until we get all the way back around to our peg here with the 2 loops, and that will mark the beginning of our rounds from here on out. Now, because we are choosing to do it this way, this round is still considered part of our toe rounds. You know, where I figured out that I needed 22 rounds for the toe. The 22 will still be counted until all of these are off. So once all of the duplicate or double stitch pegs are gone, then I will start counting the rounds for my actual foot. So we are going to work back, like I said, knit all the way around, treat both of these 2 pegs just like they've got 1 stitch, and then we're going to work the rounds that we've determined from the spreadsheet. Now, if you're not using the spreadsheet, I want to show you how you can measure the toe, because this is the same exact amount of fabric that you're going to use for the heel. So that way you can determine when you need to stop the actual rounds of the foot so that you can make your heel. Now remember, you need to have negative ease. So if your foot length is 9 inches, you don't want to stop at 7. You want to give yourself at least a 1/2 inch of negative ease. That's why I suggest using the spreadsheet. It will make your life a lot easier. So if all you've got, I'm going to show you a couple ways to measure. Like I said, you can use an actual sock ruler, which I will show you that later in the video. If all you have is a little flimsy tape measure, you can take something that is rigid and put it inside of that little dimple there of the toe, and remember where it is on that rigid spot, and then measure it from there. Or you can take a different tape measure and put it in there. This is about, because it's stretched right now and it's gonna loosen up once it's further down. I'm gonna say 1.5 inches. So I'm going to stop, if I'm not using my spreadsheet, at least 1.5 inches before my desired length. That is how you do your toe shaping. Your heel shaping is exactly the same. Continue knitting in the round. Like I said, once you have finished working where there are no longer any pegs with 2 loops, that's where you will start counting for the foot rounds. If you are doing the toe in a different color, I recommend, just because of the way that we close the Kitchener stitch later, I recommend that you do 5 rounds more before changing colors to the color you want for your foot. It just gives it a little bit more stability. You're not having to worry about tails when it comes to closing off the Kitchener and things of that nature. So let's go ahead and start knitting in the round, and I'm going to show you what this side is going to do, because it's going to do something funky, and I want you to know that you're not doing anything wrong. So pause the video and we'll see you back in a few minutes. Okay, I've knit all the way back around. My next stitch here is a double loop. And like I said, we're just going to treat that as one stitch. Remember not to grab your contrasting yarn there. You definitely don't want to knit that into your project. So now that we've got a couple rounds down, I'm going to do something with this stitch so that it is not accidentally knit into the project. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you look at your sock and you kind of look here in between, you can see that this contrasting yarn right here is kind of knitted into the base of your stitches right here. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to pop that loop off that we just made, and I'm just going to pop that off and put the loop back on. That I have knit that stitch off right there, that double loop. I'm just going to continue knitting around on this side. Now remember, this is still part of our toe if we are counting. So just continue knitting. Like I said, now this side is going to be funky and loose. Now this, on this side, until these stitches are established, I would hold the yarn a little bit tighter than you did on the other side. Because you've got all these stitches here that are kind of like looping through, and this is normal because of the way it is here on the inside. It's completely normal. Once you get several rounds done, you can actually kind of pull the yarn on this side, pull it inward, and those loops, these extra loops right here on the sides, will kind of pop to the other side where they need to be. Just go slow on this side so that way you don't pop one of those little extra loops off. Take your time. Once you get all of these worked off and a couple rounds in, then you can pick up your speed. Okay, you see how this one just popped off? That stitch right here just popped off. I'm just going to put it right back on there. That's just one of them double loops. And see, it popped off again. I'm just going to pop it back on there. All of this is completely normal. Like I said, this right here in the beginning, it's just the nature of the Kitchener cast on. Okay, we're back over here to the peg with the 2 loops. We're going to go around one more time until we get back to this peg. Then we will start counting the rows from there for our foot. Pause your video and we will be back to check in a second. When you get back around to the other side, it should be a little easier to control the funky stitches, as I like to call them. So what I like to do is come here on the inside, and I just kind of, if you watch these stitches, you'll be able to see what it does. I just kind of tug to them a little bit and see how that just kind of like rolls in. You don't have to do that because it will naturally do it later. I just think for sanity purposes, when working these first couple rounds, that it helps if you kind of pull those in. Like I said, you don't have to, but see, it kind of takes those rolls and puts them behind your pegs, which is what you want. But when you get, like I said, a few rounds around done, they're going to be lower than your peg level anyway, and so they're going to be out of your way here in the next few minutes anyway. But I just like to push them and get them out of my way, because see, when I'm lifting this, like this whole section is lifting up, it's because there's not enough stitches on here yet on the cast on. And so we're actually kind of working our thread or our yarn all at one time. It's kind of all just connected there. So again, you know, just be slow. If you've got to grab the yarn in front of those other pegs to maintain so that it doesn't slip off, by all means, please do so. Again, like I said, the last thing you want to do is to have your stitches pop off and have to restart. Like I said, just, you know, pull them down a little bit out of the way, the more rounds that you get done right here in the beginning, the easier it is going to be for them just to kind of stay back here on this side. I just go slow and watch my work to see what it's doing, to know if I need to grab a hold of that next stitch or not, to keep them from popping off. Just like I say, continue doing that knitting all the way around. So I'm coming back over here to my marked stitch. That peg is the last peg in my round. This is my marked peg, which is my first peg. So from here, I am going to start counting my rounds for my foot. And like I determined in the spreadsheet, I know exactly how many rounds that I need to knit before I start my heel. So I do recommend, like I said, writing it down or using a row counter, a notebook to write little hashes in, whatever you find is the easiest for you. So yeah, let's continue to do that, and I will meet you back when it is time to do the heel shaping. Okay guys, welcome back. I have finished the rounds for my foot, and now I am going to close off the Kitchener stitch. So the first thing you want to do is look for your tail. This was our original tail from our cast on. So wherever your tail is, you want to start on the opposite side. And this is where our little yarn here comes in handy, because we can come right down here and see where the yarn goes through those stitches. So what I do is kind of put my finger through these loops and just kind of hold on to them gently, and they're kind of just really holding the other yarn out of the way. And you're going to look for the first loop. Sometimes it can be deceiving. Like, is it this one? No. And the reason why I know it's not is because that one is actually connected to a stitch. Now I know it's probably hard for you to see that. So I'm going to grab the next loop. And what we're looking for here is we want to pull the yarn on the opposite side when we're pulling this loop. So if you see me pulling from here, this loop right here is actually moving. We don't want that. So that tells me that I need to pull from this side. And what that does is that little stitch right there that I was thinking was the first one, it's actually pulling it taut. So now we're going to go to this next stitch. And again, we're just going to pull. And you see how the stitch is moving down? That's what we want. Now we're not going to pull tight, because what we want to do is kind of maintain the same stitch tension as the stitches above it and below it. You can always go back and pull tighter, but if you pull too tight, then you're going to get like a cinched line across the bottom of your sock, and you don't want that. So you can always, like I said, go back later and tighten it up a little bit more if you need to. And tighten it down. You see how that yarn is pulling through that stitch? That's exactly what we want. Again, we're just pulling it slow. You don't want to pull it too fast, especially if you are using any type of yarn that has wool in it, because the friction will cause your yarn to felt. All right, so here's our next stitch. And usually, you know, if you pull from this side on this one, then you're going to pull from the top on the other one. And just cinch that down. Not tightly, just loosely. And this tail is going to get longer and longer as we go down. But you see how that's closing up right there? The tension is just about the same as the stitches above it and below it. Definitely don't want it tight, but to me that looks pretty darn good. So that's how we close the Kitchener. We just keep pulling those stitches across. Tug to it to see. Looks pretty good to me. And we're just going to keep going. Don't let this part intimidate you. It does take practice. Don't expect to like come right out the gate swinging, you know. The first sock I did, I pulled it so darn tight that it looked like a seam line, you know, in a sock, like from a store-bought sock. Yeah, it was really tight, but I learned from it and fixed my mistakes on the next sock. So it's all a learning process. And I'm going to leave this working yarn or tail yarn, marker yarn. I'm going to leave that in there until I'm completely done, because it helps me also find the last stitch on the other side. Work your way across to the other side, and I'll show you what to do right here towards the end. Okay, so I want to show you what you need to do if you run into a snag on your yarn where you actually split the stitch, how to get around that. First, you have to, unfortunately, you have to cut the little extra part of your yarn where it went around both sides of your stitch. And you can fish it through for a while, but then it gets to the point where it just wants to bunch up. So what you need to do is look for the stitch below that it's wanting to bunch up around, and grab that piece and kind of with a crochet hook and kind of pull it through the best you can. It's kind of hard to show this on a video, so let me turn it sideways so that I can actually see what I'm doing. I'm just going to come up here and grab a little bit further where the yarn's not bunched up. And I'm just going to pull it through that stitch. And then from there, I can finish pulling that loop the way I need to. I hope that makes sense. And if you run into this issue, I hope that helps. When you get to the other side, you know that you are done when you can pull on your tail and that loop will move. This is one of the downsides to using wool yarn, but it makes for a beautiful sock. You definitely want to have either nylon or a polyester. If you're using like an acrylic polyester blend would work. You got to have that additive for not only stability on the sock, but bounce back, which is officially closed. Now, I do have a little bit of a seam here because of the way that I had to close it with the split yarn, but I'm okay with that because that's going to black out. From here, I'm just going to pull out this marking yarn, and then we will cut this and fish it in through the inside of the sock. So we're just going to gently pull that just through enough to where you can grab it with your hands if you don't have a darning needle handy. I'm just going to leave that on the inside of the sock. And there we go. So I have the toe and the foot of the sock done. And now it is time to work on the heel. So if you are going to do different colored heels, then let me show you what you need to do from here. If you are not using a different color for your heel, you just continue to work with your yarn and start wrapping and turning exactly the same way that we did on our toe. So we're going to leave our working yarn. We're holding the loom, and if you are right-handed, your marked pegs are on the left side. If you are left-handed, your marked pegs are on the right side. So I am just going to take my different colored yarn, and I'm going to leave the tail connected. I'm going to make a slip knot, make it to where the tail is on the inside. We're just going to cinch that down. So I'm putting it on the peg next to the first peg. And then I am going to, this is mainly just like a anchor peg, if you will. I'm just going to kind of hold that down, and then I'm going to start knitting with that new color. Don't worry about this. We'll deal with that later. And now we're going to continue and do the same exact thing that we did for the toe. We are going to knit all the way around to this stitch, do our wrap and turn, back and forth, until we get 2 loops on each of our marked pegs, and then we're going to do the same thing for the increases that we did last time. We just work back and forth, working one off at a time. Remember that we don't work the last stitch here or the last stitch here. We just we just work in the round. But because we're doing a different color, let me show you what you do at the end. Okay, so we're back over here to this first peg. So just as a refresher, take that loop off, wrap the yarn around the peg, pop the loop back on, and then knit back to the other side and do the same thing. Continue doing that until all your pegs, the marked pegs, have your 2 loops on them. So I'm not going to show step by step how to work the heel because it is identical to the toe. So if you need a refresher, you can rewind to the toe because it is, like I said, it is exactly the same concept. We are just working all of our decreases down and then working the increases back. And it's kind of amazing that you can do the same exact short rows on the toe and the heel, and it serve really 2 different purposes within the same project. So yeah, we're just gonna continue to do this back and forth like I said, like we did for the toe. And then you will have your complete foot done. Then all you got to do is work on the leg and the cuff stitches, and you will have your sock done. Pick that yarn up and back around we go. And now, just like I said, just keep going back and forth until you've decreased. You have 2 stitches on each of your marked pegs, and then you're going to start increasing one by one on each side until you have 1 left over here. So what's going to happen is when you get back to where you only have 1 loop here, or excuse me, 2 loops here on this last hook peg, then we're going to pick up our normal color yarn and then work back in the round and work that one off and this one over here off. So let's continue. All of our decreases are done. There are 2 loops on every marked peg. Now we're going to work our increases the same way that we did for the toe. We're going to knit back to this stitch, the first one that has the 2 loops on it, and we're going to turn and knit back and just keep going back and forth until we have worked all of those loops off of the marked pegs, just like we did for our toe. I will show you what to do to transition to the new, well, back to our main sock body color. Okay, so I have increased back to where I have 1 peg over here with 2 loops, and now I've got 2 pegs over here with 2 loops. So normally what we would do if we are using just 1 color, we would turn here and wrap back and then just start knitting in the round from here. But we don't want to do that because we don't want this color over here. So what we're going to do different is I'm going to go ahead and work these 2 loops off with our heel color. I'm going to drop that. I'm going to take this little anchor off and just, you know, pull the slip knot out. And we're going to use this later to, if we have any little gaps here that we can sew up and just snip our contrasting yarn. Put that on the inside. We will use our darning needle later to work in those ends. So from here, we are going to start working in the round again, just by simply treating these 2 stitches again as one. You may need to pull the tail a little tight here just to kind of cinch that down. And then you just continue working in the round. I like to take the tail and put it over the working yarn just to kind of also lock that in place for the next stitch. And then, like I said, we're just going to continue knitting around. Our heel is done. Now we need to work on our leg. So you'll have this little divot. That is completely normal. Once you start putting more rounds in on the leg, this will pop down and you'll actually be able to see the way the heel is shaped. I normally do 60 rounds for the leg and then 20 rounds of knit and purl ribbing. But I think I'm going to do shorties this time. So I'm probably going to do 30 rounds for the leg and then 20 rounds for knit and purl. So work on your leg, then do your knit and purl rib, and then I will show you how to bind off at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to bind off. Just for sample reasons, I knitted 30 rounds on the leg, and then I did 15 on the rim, the rib stitch. If you need more in-depth tutorial on how to do that, I will have my other sock tutorial link below in the description. But what we want to do for the bind off is you're going to have, if you're right-handed, your marked pegs will be to the left. Your unmarked pegs will be to the right. If you are left-handed, it is the opposite. So basically, you're starting here at your marked peg for your beginning of the round. And you want to loosely, because you want to make sure you've got enough yarn, loosely wrap around the loom. I do it 3 times. Just take that yarn and loosely wrap around. So you want to make sure that you have enough. And then I usually go a little bit further just for good measure. Cut that off. So starting at your marked peg, right-handers are going to work to the left. The left-handed are going to work to the right. We are going to skip this first peg. And our second peg, we want the yarn to go up through the loop. So we're going to bring it below. And we're just going to kind of treat it like a purl stitch. And bring that yarn through that stitch. Now we're going to go back to the stitch that we skipped, and now we want it to come down. So we're going to take the yarn above the loops on the hook. Make sure you get that stitch that was, that piece of yarn that was skipped, that's going across. And then scoop that yarn down and pull that through. Now we're going to go back and work this way. We're going to skip this peg and start here. So we want the yarn to come up. Go back to the one that we skipped. We want it to come down. Skip this next peg. We want the yarn to come up. Go back to the one that we skipped. We want it to come down. And that is the sequence on how to bind off. This gives it a stretchier bind off for your ankle. You want to make sure that you do this loose, so that way you can fit it over your heel. So you skip the next peg, you go yarn up, go back to the peg skip, yarn down. Skip the next peg, yarn up, yarn down. Skip, yarn up, yarn down. Skip, yarn up, yarn down. That is your sequence all the way around. When you get back to your beginning peg, we are just going to work that one more time to kind of secure that whole bind off in together. And I will show you how to do that when we get around to the other side. once you get back over here to this other side, we're just going to loop that around one more time. To fasten that off together. And you are done. Now all you need to do is start popping the stitches off of the lid. And there you have it. So we have a sock with a different color heel. Right here is where we joined the yarn, so you can secure that down a little bit with your tail. Over here is where we did the extra when we went around and we picked up that second stitch, the double stitch. If you do not like the looks of that, alternatively, you can complete all of the double stitches off and then start back with your normal color. It doesn't bother me. I know it's just the nature of what's going to happen. Or if you have some extra tail yarn from your sock body, you can duplicate stitch over that and hide that. Like I said, it doesn't bother me because I know that's just kind of what's going to happen on the loom. But there we have our sock. I have made an adjustment in the formula on the spreadsheet. So if you are watching this video as of September 30th, 2023, and you have purchased a spreadsheet prior to that, reach out to me. I'll send you the updated file. If you purchase the spreadsheet afterwards, you will have the updated file. I added a little bit more negative ease into the calculations because it's just too big. Plain and simple, it's just too big. So that has been updated, but I am very happy with these looms from Cindy Wood Crafts. I love the fact that they are marked. I don't have to mark them off other than just my beginning peg. So maybe if I order some in the future, I might have one peg that is not pink. So I'll know which side I'm working from. I mean, it's no big deal to pop a stitch marker on there, but yeah, so I'm happy, extremely happy with the way this came out. I will link my other tutorial below that goes into a little bit more in depth on the actual stitches as far as the knitting and the purling. So this tutorial was mainly for working on the new loom and doing the different colored heel. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know below. If you are new around here, I would appreciate a like and maybe subscribe if you so want to. And to all my returning viewers, thank you so much. And remember, these will be available October 1st, 2023. The link for that, as well as the link for my spreadsheet to make your socks, are all in the description below. And until next time, guys, happy looming. Bye.